Hello and welcome to ArtShow. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Jon Manteau. Hey, Jon, how are you?
Hey man, been a minute.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
For those who are just joining us, Jon and I go way back. We had an exhibition together years and years ago. Um, so that it was fun for me to go through your site and other places to find works of yours since I was already familiar with works. But I wanted to choose a few pieces that I thought were extraordinarily fascinating and a little bit different from your work. So I wanted to start with this painting. So this is a big one, is it not?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I love this painting. The layering on this is just it's a little beyond what I'm used to seeing in your work. Can you tell me about a little bit about this particular painting?
Well, I'm really, really glad you chose this because it's not really out in the ether because it
Mm-hmm.
was a private commission and there were some weird things around that about whether we could reproduce the images. The folks that have their estate, I guess, didn't want photographs of the interior of their place. And I was asked by Marguerite Rogers Design and my friend Barb Herberger to design a piece for this atrium. And I didn't have exact measurements, but basically I got pictures of they'd ripped the front part of the house off, and instead of there being uh, a level there it was 2 stories tall, and they wanted something for each side. So this piece is 6 feet by 18 feet, and as you can see in this image, it's one continuous image, not broken in half. That's how I worked on it,
Yeah.
and it's called "What Lurks Beneath,"
Mm.
which was a callback to an earlier painting that I did about surfing and being unsure of what creatures might be in the shadows underneath the pier that I
Mm-hmm.
was surfing next to. So this piece uh, was very much about that. Now, because I was working with a designer and a decorator, it was kind of funny. They brought me into their conference room and had a conference room table with fabric swatches on it, and they were showing me the colors that were in the interior. And
Mm.
most artists, I think, would get bent out of shape about that,
Mm-hmm.
because then they're making choices for you. But
Right.
I grabbed a couple of the swatches that I liked,
Mm.
and there was some give and take over the course of making the painting. I'd send them in progress images, and I'd get comments like, "Oh, hate that color,"
Mm-hmm.
but for
Right.
the
Yeah.
most, yeah, it was. But for the most part, 95% of it, I just pretty much locked in on what they wanted. And I've never been back to the place to see how the painting has aged. I've been worried about sunlight on it for
Uh-huh.
years because
But are these enamels?
it's all latex house paint,
You take-
some of which is enamel. On occasion, I'll use oil-based high
Yeah.
gloss just because it's like patent leather shiny,
Yeah.
even more so than high gloss acrylic or latex. So
Well, I would love to see this in real life. I mean, I can imagine it's a stunner because I know your work, and you also have a tendency to like really add wonderful texture to the piece. So I can imagine this is not smooth. This
not
sucker
at all.
really looks like it captures delight. So my one question about this and some of the other pieces that you do is the materials that you use. Do you ever worry about like archivalness?
Well, a lot of this paint is exterior grade, so it's
Mm.
it's meant to really take a beating
Hmm.
and be light saturated. So, I, of course, trained artists are supposed to think about, will the oil paint eat through the paper if I don't prime it?
Yeah.
But it really, sometimes you give up some things to
Yeah.
get what you need.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I mean, I may find out if I'm still here in 20 years that this color or that color is fugitive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's happened with Rothko paintings.
Well, that's
Um,
what they have conservators for. That's their job,
yeah.
right? So you're actually, stimulating the economy by creating work that needs
Well,
help.
this painting, History of the Mark, is it's on 3/4 inch birch ply.
Yeah.
cabinet grade ply, and really, really rock hard surface.
Yeah.
I'm working on some canvases right now, and it's a little annoying because I can't take a belt sander to it or a
Mm.
blowtorch if I needed to.
Hmm.
But I don't, for stability's sake, I don't think these are going to go anywhere. I
No.
mean, they're really built to last.
Well, I chose this particular one because it had that same quality that the first one we showed is, which some of your work is very dynamic, but some of it is just so rich in terms of the layering of ideas that you have one on top of the other to create something new. So in a weird way, I had first approached this looking at it almost like a Pollock, but now it's more like a David Sally, the way that you are able to take these things and put them all together. It's fantastic work. But I also had a question for you in terms of the materials. So I noticed that you create a lot of pieces that are multiple paneled. Is Was that driven out of a desire of being able to move the panels and switch them as you're working, or was it really for space, or was it both?
All of the above. I The 3/4 inch birch ply pieces, when I would purchase the panels from a building supplier, mostly Home Depot, plywood comes in 8x4 sheets. And my studio mate at the time said, Johnny, why don't you leave them that size? And I said, well, because I'm not really a big person. I'm
Mhm.
only 5'8", and my wingspan is about this. So I
Uh-huh.
can manipulate a 4x4 panel very easily. So if I need
Okay.
to tilt something, I work flat on the floor.
Right,
And so if
right.
I need to tilt something for a passage to slide right, left, up, down,
Yeah.
I can control that. Once or twice I painted on 8x4 panels, and without a studio assistant, which I've had in the past,
Mhm.
they're difficult to manage.
Yeah.
So I did that out of practicality. But when they were 4x4 squares, this is a piece with play mats, which are 2x2.
I was going to ask
Um,
you about that. That's my next question. Go ahead.
yeah, I thought about them almost like tiles.
Yeah.
So in a way, there's always these micro ideas kicking around in your head,
Yeah.
aside from
Yeah.
the
Well,
big
the
ideas.
idea that you can take panels and switch them or whatnot, to me, that's a
Yeah.
very Johnsian idea.
When,
In his Yusuke series, he was doing that where he would paint and then switch them up. So you can see pieces of where it should be in, and suddenly it's over on that side of the canvas. It makes it really dynamic. I was happy about that. But I really wanted to ask you about, you said that these were playmats, because that's what I thought they were at first.
yeah.
But
Um,
have you made these in wood as well with that deckled edge kind of a thing?
no, these are all neoprene. They're either half inch, or the panels I'm working on these days are more rigid, 3/4 inch.
Okay,
And
but it's still the same
yeah,
structure.
it's
Okay.
basically a rubber. I don't know what the breakdown of neoprene is, but they use it for wetsuits. I
Yeah.
surf, and so I have another connection to it. It's rigid enough that as long as I don't radically bend the panels,
Yeah.
which you can, they're flexible, the paint stays in place. They're incredibly light. I think partly what happened with the shift from wood panel to the neoprene was um, my studio assistants moved on.
Hmm.
They got older and grew up, and moved to different cities, the West Coast, New York, and I was having a difficult time um, making these large scale paintings by myself,
Yeah.
and then moving them. And every time I'd have a show, they would curse me and say they were never coming back again because the pieces were too heavy.
Right.
So one day I was walking near my studio, and I'm not kidding, a neoprene panel blew into my leg,
Oh yeah.
like from the gods. And someone had discarded uh, 4 or 5 panels,
Yeah.
probably from their basement,
Yeah.
for their children. And one blew into my leg, and I picked it up. And as I'm walking to unlock the garage door, I'm looking at it and I'm bending it. And it was like a divine moment.
That's
And I
great.
thought, like this painting is 8 by 12 feet. And I can stack it to about this high,
Uh,
and I can install it by myself. I'll usually install at the top left corner,
yep.
draw sort of a right angle, and I don't really need people to help me
That's
installed.
fantastic.
The piece that's behind me is 12 by 10 feet, and I installed it
All
by
by
myself
yourself. So
in half an hour.
the other thing that you mentioned was you talked about water and surfing. So I used to surf as well. So I totally understand, the beautiful qualities of water and large bodies of water and what that can do. And I'm now starting to see a lot of sort of wave patterns in your work, but I don't know if that's intentional or not.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
okay. So are you always refreshed by getting back into the water?
Um, the ocean is a magical place. If you've surfed, so it's beautiful, but can also be terrifying.
Yeah.
And I've been out in some pretty mammoth surf, 8 to 12 feet, which is for me, mammoth is as large as I'll go out in. Anything beyond
Hmm.
that is just suicidal.
Hmm.
Um, but and I've seen crazy things in the water, sharks,
Hmm.
six
Me
hundred
too.
pound dolphin break right next to me.
Hmm.
Um, so there is a fluid thing that happens with the way that I work. I did a huge carpet piece, which is called Bounce,
Hmm.
and 16 by, I forget, 10 feet. And there's also a photo of me standing in front of it. And it was very much created to be like to scale, like you're in that wave.
Hmm.
And both the turmoil and the tranquil qualities, which is
Hmm.
what a wave is, right? From a
Hmm.
distance, it's
Hmm.
kind of a bump until it's
Hmm.
on you.
Hmm.
So,
So do you always find that is nature like a primary source for you?
um, I'm really all over the map when it comes
Okay.
to what my references are. Every piece that you've shown, I instantly thought, what was the seed
Mm.
that grew that oak tree?
Hmm.
And it can be uh, sort of organic landscape. It can be urban landscape, which I don't see as organic so much.
Hmm.
A lot of right angles. Um, could you repeat the question again?
I was just curious if nature is a go-to for inspiration for you,
Yeah.
or is it just affect you and it allows you to see nature within it, other things?
It's an interesting question because I think the biggest influence for me is history. I'm a lover of history.
Okay.
In elementary school and then high school, other than art, my second favorite subject was always history. And then in art school, a lot of my classmates hated art history. I loved it. I would always
Hmm.
get A's because it was tied to history. And so for me, nature exists within history.
Hmm.
So it really depends on what I'm after in a particular painting. But
I'm
as
curious, when
we're
you're talking about history, are you talking about, say, geopolitical history or art history or
all
all
of it,
history?
all of
Okay,
it.
it's all of an
Um,
interest.
the painting that you showed with the little dots of color, that one is called History of the Mark. This
Mm.
um, was this in To a Hammer looks everything looks like a nail. Or I had a show called Philadelphia Historical Artifacts,
Hmm.
because I thought to myself, anything that I make is a Philadelphia historic artifact because I'm based
Yeah,
in Philadelphia.
yeah,
So some of it was my history, some of it was sports history, some of it was political history,
yeah.
social justice history.
It's
So
fascinating. I've been thinking about history lately. In fact, I just realized that all artists are part of art history. So that it's a small little thing, but it means it means a huge bunch to me. So I wanted to show this one last piece because you also have these amazing works on paper, but they look like they're prints, but they're not prints, but they are prints at the same time. So there's a large series of these, right? What can you tell me a little? I selected this one because I thought it was an outstanding piece. Is this just enamels and spray paints on this?
it's Sumi ink,
Okay.
and I, years ago, I I would go months and months and months doing my thing in the studio, which is basically industrial house paint, and it's very opaque.
Mm.
And but I always loved watercolor. I was always a printmaking minor in undergrad and in grad school. In fact, I did so many prints in grad school that I did more work than a lot of the printmakers did. But it was less about the technique and more the idea of a multiple take on the same structure, and whether they were accidental marks or things that were intentional, just one little micro change. And the possibilities. Now we're in the digital world, so that is in play too. But
I can't help
yeah,
but see the waves in this
yeah,
and
they
think about
start
our
off as
conversation.
I mean, basically, when you work with Sumi ink, it's a watercolor technique. So
Right.
the Zen part of the exercise is once you lose the white of the paper, you're in trouble because it's not opaque. So when I do these, I have to think in reverse.
Yeah.
Wherever the highlights are going to be, that's the first thing that I have to preserve because you
Yeah,
can't
that's a
layer
total
it later
printmaking
on.
way of thinking.
Yeah, and and I do a lot of micro splattering with toothbrushes, and that gives you like a spit bite look.
Right,
Um,
right.
and then the blue lines that you saw in that piece were Montana spray paints. I was saying to my former gallery director, Luella Tripp, that I've always been a vandal. I've come, and I think most artists are that. We just don't necessarily use that language, but you engage with something, and even if you want to copy uh, uh, a Richard Diebenkorn painting, you're not probably going to do a great job, just because you love it. And then in some ways you are vandalizing it because you're not that
Right.
person. It may be your spin on it, but the spray paint mark has really come into the work big time in the last 5 or 6 years. And
Yeah.
I was a graffiti artist back in the 70s with a bunch of graffiti clubs that are kind of famous in the street art world now. We didn't call it street art back then. And I spent my academic life in school knowing that I came from that tribe, but avoiding talking about that because in the early 80s, when I was in New York, the street art thing was sliding into the galleries, and artists like Basquiat and Keith Haring and a lot of other artists. But it annoyed me that they were going from vandalism and this sort of political statement to, dare I say, the mall. That's how I felt like, oh, now it's, and when I was younger, I still was full of my punk rock
Piss and vinegar.
sensibility. Yeah, so it bothered me. But
Yeah.
and I'd have friends that were both artists and had come from that tribe say, John, you were so that, and now it's Picasso and Pollock and Krasner
Well,
and
you
I'm
just
like,
got bigger, I say.
yeah. And so I had all these techniques for making sort of like blotted line that
Yeah.
looked like spray paint, but it wasn't. And then finally I had a bunch of graffiti artists at one of my shows, and one of them was like, my tag was beep, BEEP. And he looks at me and he goes, beep. He's like, why don't you just, and we had a whole dialogue about it. And
Yeah.
I think a week later, I went to Artisan Craftsman and bought all this Montana spray paint. And, to be honest, I feel like I need to back away from it a little bit. Like I'm almost using it too much. But
Well, yeah, I'll come over to your studio and we can talk about it. That's another whole conversation. I want to ask you about, you were talking about your youth, and I'm curious to know, obviously you had art exposure when you were a kid, but at what point did you say, I'm going to be an artist?
I think late in high school,
Hmm.
I fancied myself as an athlete, but I'm not a big guy. And I took a lot of heat from coaches about that, like, you're 5 foot nothing. And, and my art teachers were sort of the other side of that. They're like, why are you wasting your time with sports? And you should be in the studio more. And so the art teachers didn't think I was as committed as I should have been, certainly by my senior year in high school. And, but, it was probably right about 1979, 80 that I decided I needed to do something. And art had always been a continuous thing.
Was
Uh,
there anybody in particular that really lit your fire, or was it sort of cumulative from everybody?
it's cumulative, but in high school, I was in high school in the mid 70s, and photorealism was still a big thing, especially
Mm,
for students, because you develop a skill. And my high
right.
school teacher really wanted me to go that direction.
Hmm.
And, and I had some skill there, but then he turned me on to Picasso and it was over.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Once
the
you
whole
realize there's
notion
a
of,
larger conversation to be had.
yeah, I mean, as soon as I saw analytical cubism and realized, wait a minute, we can fracture this realism and
Right. Once you understand the possibilities, then you're like, wow, they can now I can really grow and spread my
yeah,
wings. I'm
but
I want to talk about your process, your creativity process. So when you're going to make new works, is there anything in particular? You did talk about art history or regular history or anything, but is there any way like that you as a go-to that sparks your creativity? You're going to make something new. What is it that gets you moving?
well, if I'm in the mindset that I'm prepping for a show,
Hmm.
I'm a bit old school in that I think that we used to tend to work in a series, and things had to kind of fit within that series.
Hmm.
That's not to say that creatives don't then make a piece and it blows, it's just somewhere else. And
Right.
I always had a
What is
tendency to
this?
kind of paint over it or push it to the side. I have a couple
Uh-huh.
pieces in the studio right now that people like, but they're driving me crazy,
Mm.
because they're a weird combination of what was, what is, and what's coming. And so I don't know if I want to push them back or put a layer of paint on them so they look like uh,
Hmm.
where I am right now. But as far as process is concerned, a lot of people tend to think I'm a process painter, but I'm not so much. What I really am is a stripe painter. I studied with Sean Scully at Parsons for 2 years, and
Well, that explains a lot.
yeah, I'm a stripe painter.
Yeah.
And most people don't get that through all the chaos. They just don't see that forest through the trees. And you brought up David Sally, which you and I talked about in the way back. And when I was in my
Did we?
library,
Wow. You got a
yeah,
great memory.
yeah, when and I remember you were younger than me, and I remember I was really impressed that you saw that reference through what I was
For
doing,
all
which
of that, yeah.
yeah, and we weren't that far removed probably from his heyday. But
Yeah.
when I was in my library yesterday, I went and found this little book. For me, it's the Sally Bible, and I pulled it out and looked at it. And even though his work is mostly figurative,
Yeah.
um, there was this warping of figure ground where one layer cancels out
Yeah,
the
it's
next.
the ideas, the
Yeah,
layering of odd ideas that
yeah,
I mean, when I started to really understand him, it changed my understanding of what a true diptych can really achieve.
yeah,
It's not just two pictures, it's two ideas. And I think
yeah.
you have that in your works. You have a lot of ideas running, but sometimes they're not all running in the same direction. And
No,
it's that tension that I really liked. Uh,
and with color choices and compositional choices, I have this little game that I play. I call it the wild card. And
mhm.
I'll know what I want the color theory to be. The painting in back of me is basically white, yellow, blue, black
Uh-huh.
with some kind of rust. But sometimes I'll just go like this and point to my paint. And whenever
Right.
I point at, I have to use 90% of the time.
Yeah.
I'm appalled by it and it gets erased. But I do the same thing with composition. I'll
Yeah.
throw something in there that shouldn't be there and see what happens.
That's a
Um,
very like John Cage-ish way of approaching, almost like, using the I Ching and trying to figure out, letting a little bit of chaos enter, but it's not really chaos, but it is at the same time. Um, Time for two more questions.
okay.
The first one I want to ask you is a question I've asked other artists, and I'm often surprised by the response. You made these pictures, but do you consider the works that you're making to be a reflection of your life? Do you find them to be autobiographical, or are you trying to
Absolutely.
make separate?
Absolutely. I mean, every image that you've shown, I was immediately hit with something.
Okay.
I'm glad that the tenor of this conversation is mostly positive, but I'm going to insert this. About 10 years ago, I survived throat cancer.
Right. No,
And
I think it's important.
that
How
image
did
that,
your work change when that happened? That's
well, that image that you showed of Kirby, that was the playmat piece with the pieces detached to me standing like this.
uh-huh.
That was very much me being defiant. I pulled that show off within 6 months of going into remission. I'd
Hmm.
lost a third of my body weight. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
And I was on the rebound there. So it was kind of me going, yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
still here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, the piece with the tree branches that had a very specific narrative.
Mm.
Um, they the pieces don't always start that way. I'm not really great at keeping a sketchbook, but over the years, I'll write phrases down, wordplay
Mm-hmm.
that I'll use for future titles for paintings.
Mm.
And I'm always amazed by that wordplay influencing the narrative in the painting. One of my favorites was an F. Scott Fitzgerald fracture, and it was dogs appraising buildings. And
That's awesome. I
I
never
looked
heard
at it
that
and I
one.
went, oh my
Yeah.
God, that's such an elegant way of
Yeah.
saying a dog pissing on a building,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know? And it stuck to this painting. And then the painting kind of became about that in
Uh-huh.
a way. And,
That's
you know,
awesome. So one last question, and it's a little bit of a turn on the question that I usually ask.
okay,
What does art mean to you?
wow.
Yeah.
Um, that's really difficult because I just went to a school yesterday to talk to them about a project that I'm going to do collaborate with them and their students on, and we kind of got into a side dialogue about what is art.
Mm-hmm.
We're educators,
Right.
and I used to have an assignment called Art Not Art, and I would put weird objects up on the wall, some of which were clearly art, and then something that wasn't, like this candy with a
Mm-hmm.
push pin. And I think I'm constantly grappling with what we consider art and why.
Mm-hmm.
And your question again, if you wouldn't mind,
What
was
does art mean to you? What does it mean?
it's so complex I don't even know if I can give you it.
Well,
You know,
I wouldn't ask that question of anybody, but I think out of all the artists that I've interviewed, I think I was curious to hear what you would say about this because you've been making art for so long and you've gone through different phases and whatnot. So I was just kind of curious. I didn't know if you could answer it,
I I've kind of bounced back and forth in the last 10 years between art and music.
but
My Instagram presence is Art and Music Man, and there's not much music posted there. Every once in a while, you'll see pictures of me
mm-hmm.
and the band kind of jamming or whatever.
Right.
But I've moved between forms, and that's been pretty fascinating to me. But I always come back to visual art,
Mm-hmm.
and I know normally at the end of your interviews you'll ask questions, and it was kind of thinking about what your final question, like why is art important to you, or
Mm-hmm.
um, and I thought in my moments of mayhem and craziness, which are usually surrounding my personal life or my job that I may have a love-hate relationship with, it's always back in the studio where I'm grounded, yet I get to fly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you're in the ground with your tangible studio and your materials, but that's where you take flight, right? That's where what's here takes off. So
I love that grounded but flying. I mean,
yeah, I mean
there's those words mean a lot of different things. So that's
yeah, I mean
awesome. That's really that works for me. So
it it's really an
unfortunately,
interesting
we're
dynamic.
running out of time. I've got like 50 more questions now, so I'll have to go back and I need a studio visit. But John, I really want to thank you for coming by and talking to me today. Boy, that flew by real quick. And I also want to thank everybody who tuned in to watch Art Show. We really appreciate your support. And of course, we love it when you like, share, and of course, subscribe. That really helps. If you have any questions about today's interview, stick them in the comments section. If we can't answer them, we'll pass them along to Jon. So thank you, everyone, for watching today. And Jon, again, thank you for coming by, talking with me.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Take care, everyone.